Hello, hi, good afternoon. I can't see anything, and as you can hear, I'm slightly under the weather, so please bear with me. And this microphone is really sensitive, so if I'm booming, again, apologies. Anyway, hello and good afternoon. So before I hand over the stage to our esteemed panel this afternoon, I just wanted to take a few moments to introduce this series of talks that's organised by Unseen in collaboration with the Barbican, which is our first ever collaboration. It's hugely exciting. My name's Alona Pardo, and I'm a curator at the Barbican Art Gallery. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about the gallery. So since its inception in 1982, we've had a long proven track record of celebrating and championing photography, which is critical to our own exhibition programme. From our very first photography exhibition in 1984, titled American Images, that introduced the pioneers of American photography, such as Eggleston, Shaw, Winogrand, Friedlander, Frank, to a London audience, through to our current Jean-Michel Basquiat exhibition that includes rare photographic documentation of this iconic artist. Photography is absolutely critical to how we present visual culture to a wider public. Photography has the power to reflect a more diverse, more complex, and hopefully more authentic view of the world, and I hope that these series of talks that we've organised somehow goes towards addressing that. We're truly grateful to the talented Unseen team for inviting the Barbican to work with them to design this lively series of discussions that addresses head-on some of the pressing concerns dominating photography today in these dystopian and unsettling times, notably the politics of representation, conflict, state-sponsored violence, as well as the indexical veracity of photography. So further to this, I'm delighted to be introducing this second talk in this series that considers photography's role and responsibility within our current political climate. The world is currently experiencing the largest migration of people since World War II, which will no doubt become one of the defining events of the modern era. According to the UN, there are estimated to be over 60 million people on the move, fleeing war, persecution, poverty, and climate change. So here to help us unpack some of these ideas, I'm delighted to welcome on stage Edmund Clark, Ahlam, Shibli, and Nikolaj, Bendix, Skyum, Larsen, alongside our chair for this afternoon's discussion, Anthony Downey, who I think will all reflect on the role of the image and image making in this current crisis, how documentary and conceptual practices can represent, analyse, challenge, and connect the public to the lived experiences of this political and economic crisis. Before I hand over to Anthony, I just wanted to take this moment to thank all of you for giving up your afternoon to be here. It's a real honour to have you here. And I'm just going to introduce Anthony, and then I think Anthony is going to introduce our speakers for today. So Anthony Downey is an academic, editor and writer. He's written extensively on human rights, biopolitics and migration in relation to cultural production. He's Professor of Visual Arts in the Middle East and the Middle East. In the Middle East at Birmingham City University, which I should say is a really innovative institution to have such a position. He's written extensively and authored many, many publications, which I won't list here, but please do check them out if you're interested. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Anthony to introduce our speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alona, and thank you very much to the Unseen team here, Anna and so forth, for organizing this. I'm going to be very brief in my introductions because each of the photographers and artists here today are going to talk extensively about their work, but I'm going to introduce them in the order they will speak. Edmund Clark in the middle here. I've known Edmund's work since 2011, a show at the Blue Coat Gallery, I seem to recall. Edmund's got an extensive body of work. We were recently part of a panel discussion at the Imperial War Museum, where he put on an extraordinary show, one of the most important shows I've seen in at least 5 or 6 years in London. Edmund's going to talk a little bit today about a series of works called Guantanamo, If the Light Goes Out. And again, he's going to extend that into a further discussion of some of his earlier photography. The second speaker today is Ahlam Shibli, to my far right. To your far left. And Ahlam's work I've actually known for 20 years, believe it or not. I was researching last night and I realized I'd written about it about 15 years ago, the series Unrecognized, which is about a series of lost villages in Arab al-Naim in Palestine. Ahlam has an extraordinary show currently on as part of Documenta in the Neue Gallery in Kassel, and that show is called Heimat. And Ahlam will be talking a little bit today about Heimat, but also other works in her oeuvre. Our final speaker today is Nikolaj, Bendix, Skyum, Larsen. I've known Nikolaj's work at least a decade now, and we became good friends when he showed in Folkestone, where I now live, an extraordinary work called Promised Land, which is a 3-screen film. Nikolaj's going to talk a little about that today, but more importantly, he's also going to talk about a series of works that followed up that specific film. And those works followed migrants and indeed the absence of migrants in the Calais camp, the so-called jungle in northern France. So I'd like to welcome Edmund Clark.
Thank you, Anthony. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. Is that better? Excellent. I'm very tall. And thank you, Alona, for inviting me to be part of the Talks programme. Okay, there's the slide, thanks. Yeah. I'm going to talk about 3 or 4 of a series of works which I've done over the past kind of 10, 15 years, which are all related to the war on terror and kind of unseen experiences, processes, sites of events which have taken place as part of that conflict, termed the War on Terror by George Bush. The work will kind of cover the 2 exhibitions I've had recently. One is the War of Terror exhibition at the Imperial War Museum, and Terra Incognitus at the Zephyr space at the Rice-Engelhorn Museum in Mannheim. My projects tend to be very long, and I really don't know what they're going to look like or how they're going to turn out when I'm doing them. Most of my projects take kind of 3, 4, 5 years, and it's a process of trying to gain access to situations, trying to meet people, assembling, collating material, which will be photographs which I take, it will be images which other people have made, which I use, it will be documents, it will be film, a range of different media, which come out in kind of 2 main forms. Book making is really kind of key to what I do as a starting point, and that's kind of books as objects which in some way kind of speak about the subjects which I'm dealing with, rather than just being vehicles for the images which I make or use. But then it's also kind of translating that process and that kind of way of sequencing and seeing a body of work into installational form, and kind of dealing with deconstructing a way of working and then trying to put it back together again for different spaces, working with different curators in each case. So I'm going to try and refer to kind of both of those themes as I go through. So let's just kind of skip through some of the installation pictures first of all, which I'll come back to in slightly more detail. So these are from the Imperial War Museum exhibition. And you'll see some of these images again in a minute. And then some pictures from the Rice-Engelhorn Museum in Mannheim, which kind of show different ways of dealing with the same subject. My slide's not moving. There we go. I suppose one theme which is common to all my work is dealing with things which have not really been seen before. So it's trying to come up with visual strategies which, in a way, try and call into question, through trying to visualize things which haven't been seen before, how that can then make us think again or reconfigure the messages that we have been receiving and seeing through all the screens that we see. One kind of key thing to my work is trying to present the material I'm dealing with in a way which leaves people pause for thought and space to draw their own conclusions, but hopefully conclusions which make them think again and perhaps run counter to some of the ways in which these images are seen on our screens. So let's start with Negative Publicity, Artifacts of Extraordinary Rendition, which is work about the CIA secret prison program, which is actually work about documents like this, and it's work about collaboration and curation. It's based on a relationship with a counter-terrorism investigator called Crofton Black, who spent years putting together the paper trail, which kind of links the companies, the sites, the aeroplanes which were used and responsible for running the extrajudicial detention and transportation of individuals to be interrogated and tortured in prisons secret prisons run by the CIA or prisons run by other countries operating on our behalf. It's about very mundane things, and it's about this kind of narrative. This is a page from a court case, a contract dispute which was held in upstate New York between one company that rents aeroplanes out and another company that organises flight schedules for those aeroplanes. And in this court case, which was allowed to go ahead, all sorts of material was submitted about flight schedules and invoices which revealed to my collaborator these kind of flashes of light of these different places and forms of transport which were part of this process. And my work with him was kind of going through this material as a form of curation to look at what was important evidentially for him in terms of the cases he was working on, but which also spoke to me visually. So we come across the black rectangle. So the first page was a court transcript. This is a page from a CIA internal report into their own interrogation activities. That's the contents page. So you start to wonder what is, if they can keep hand drills and mock executions, what is under the black rectangle? What is the redaction? This is from the Senate Intelligence Committee summary of their research into the CIA's secret prison program. It's kind of looking at ways of visualizing this network of mundanity, kind of charged by the political significance of the different places and people that were made up this network. This is an Italian police diagram of how a CIA team abducted someone undercover from a back street in Milan. This is a waterboard which a Libyan man came across in a CIA secret prison in Afghanistan. It's about complicity. This is an email from one company to another about a flight schedule being changed, and the question is, what's the problem? Is it to do with anything to do with the coverage around that particular plane? And it's no, it's just a change of itinerary for the passengers. Smiley face. Does that person know what the cargo is in the plane, the schedule for which they are organising? And it's about photographs, how to respond to that documentation visually, which was very difficult to do initially. But eventually I went to a black site in Lithuania, a former CIA black site, and started to photograph there, and went to other black sites. This is in Romania. This was the CIA black site in Romania. And somewhere in there is the remains of the salt pit, the main CIA black site in Afghanistan. And in a sense, these pictures show nothing. They're kind of like the black rectangle. They are sort of at the limits of what you can see. But it's by showing some of the mundanity of these places, the ordinariness of these places, that it starts to, in some way, perhaps suggest how these processes and these experiences seep into all our lives. These are very everyday places, kind of places we all have experience of. These planes were going through airports which we use. And that's kind of how terror affects all of us. Terror seeps into all our lives. It infects our spaces and the way we moderate our own behaviour. That's one of the main logistics companies that was running the process. This is a company who was renting airplanes, one man working from home organising flight schedules for these planes that were going around the world, flying people to be tortured. Liminal sites. This is a hotel in Spain where pilots would stop off on their flight schedule. And this is how it's kind of affected me. This is a photograph of a pilot's house in America. This is a man who flew rendition flights. But under UK law, he has a reasonable expectation of security and privacy in his own home. So I redacted the photograph, because obviously that, I don't want to point the finger at him directly. But then I'm moderating my own behaviour, I'm moderating my own images in response to this process, because obviously, this is not a right to privacy and security which was afforded to the cargo in the planes he was flying. And there's the back street in Milan, where Abu Omar was abducted by the CIA team. And I also worked in the homes of men who were subject to this form of rendition. These are two images from the homes of men who were held in CIA secret prisons. In the book, I try to kind of create the zigzag. You have to move around from space to space, from page to page. You don't know what you're looking at until you come to kind of pages which give you that information. So you become the investigator. You have to find your own path around the book by following the page references, and each image, each document comes with a reference for you to move to. And then these are two examples of how I've shown the work in institutions, kind of playing around with the idea of scale. The image there is of another pilot's house, which has been redacted. In the Imperial War Museum, I kind of used the book as an installation. I put the book on the wall and made a short film with my collaborator about the process, about the subject, and about how we had kind of worked together. In Germany, I showed the work kind of more conventionally as large prints and documents on the wall. And for that show, we recreated a new network. So each image, each document came with references, so you could create your own zigzagging network, the network of mundanity, by moving around the museum space. Control Order Houses work I did about the detention of terrorism suspects in the United Kingdom under a form of it's detention without trial, where suspects never have a kind of a due process about what they're suspected of, but they are kind of made to go and live somewhere else. They're kind of taken away from their families, taken away from their network of associates, given somewhere to live in a different city, where every aspect of their life is then controlled by a thing called a control order, which is written by the Home Office, which literally kind of does restrict their every waking moment. I mean, they're tagged, they live under curfew, they have to report to a police station, they have to let the security forces come and search their premises, and no one's allowed to know they're there. And my work was not reveal their identity or the location of the house, and could potentially be used as evidence in their case. And as I say, the evidence on which they are being held is never tested in court. It remains secret. So the only people who see that are the government lawyers and the government themselves. So this man's lawyer never sees the evidence that he is being held under. I was given 6 days access through the Home Office to work with this man. He agreed to work with me. I photographed, in the end I had 4 days because he was moved somewhere else. I photographed every centimetre of every room in the house and measured the whole house with him. We kind of worked together measuring his space. And sat on this work for almost a year because I didn't know what to do with it, because the last access was cut when I was going to do lots of filming. In the end I decided to use the fact that I'd photographed the whole of the interior as a way of kind of bringing out this idea of a sort of panopticon of surveillance and claustrophobia. So you see every photograph that I took, and I literally would go into every room and just kind of rotate round, photographing everything. So the way in which I took the photographs and reproduced them are all about order and control. I asked him, I wasn't allowed to talk to him in much detail about his case in the house because it was bugged. But I asked him to write a record of his relationship to this very kind of problematic space in which he lived, describing his movement around the house. He just lived in 2 rooms on the ground floor, basically. The rest of the house was empty. He didn't use it. So it's about his movement, his kind of relationship to time and space, living under this form of control. He wrote, I asked him to do it for 2 weeks, and he did it for 2 days. He said, that's my life. 3 days, sorry. I include my correspondence with the government and other ways of kind of visualizing, forms that we're familiar with for visualizing our own spaces, architectural diagrams, elevations, those kind of forms. And these are a couple of examples of how I then translated that into an exhibition context. These are two images from the Imperial War Museum, where I used an image, that's an image of the room I stayed in the house, with the light coming in through the window. So it's all about being on the inside. And kind of details like the wallpapers, and filled a room with the 500 photographs of the interior. And a couple of examples from a similar idea that I used in Germany, using the floor plans. Guantanamo. It's about responding to these kind of images, which I saw when the prison camps first opened. These images of backs of people's heads, people in uniform, all about dehumanization. I didn't know at that point that you're not allowed to show people's faces when you photograph in Guantanamo. But all this imagery spoke about fear and threat. No one, even kind of the guards, had any kind of human presence to them. So the work I made was in response to that kind of imagery, and it's about disorientation. I worked on this for about 4 years, and I gradually started to realize that Guantanamo is not a place of incarceration, it was an interrogation research center. And one of the key elements to that was this idea of disorientation. The behavior management plan, which made detainees disorientated and disorganized and dependent on their relationship with their interrogator. So I tried to explore that in a number of ways. Photographically, I photographed in 3 places, in the homes where people were living once they'd been released from Guantanamo, back in the United Kingdom or in the Middle East, in the detention camps in Guantanamo on the US naval base, and in the spaces where the American community live on the naval base. I think it's the biggest and oldest base outside of America. It's been there since 1898, which is a long time in American history. It's a microcosm. Since the 60s, it existed behind a huge razor wire fence and minefield. So it's a place, also a place of kind of incarceration in its own right. And then in the book, I mix these 3 spaces up together, and I don't tell you what you're looking at. So you have to make your own kind of narrative through these images. You know that there are 3 types of space here, 3 types of personal space, 3 types of domestic experience, daily experience, whether it be where people shop, where they're tortured, or where they sleep. I'll skip through these. A second element to the Guantanamo work, which I think is very important, is this. It's a series called Letters to Omar. It's material sent to one man during 6 years of incarceration in Guantanamo. His case was picked up by his brother. Tried to campaign on his behalf, and that was picked up by his lawyers, and that was then picked up internationally. So this man received thousands of bits of material, correspondence from around the world, the vast majority from people he didn't know. So these are the kind of aesthetic choices which people made of what kind of image to send to someone they'd never met before, who's in a cell on the other side of the world, and the kind of message that they would send to him. But Omar was at the highest level of non-compliance, so every aspect of his life was controlled by his interrogators, including if he had a blanket, if he had a mattress, if he had any toilet paper, and when and in what form he received any of his correspondence. And everything he received went through a process of scanning and redacting, giving an archive number, being stamped. So he never received anything original. Everything he got had been through this process of copying. So in a sense, these are images which are created by Guantanamo Bay, which, because of the kind of process of sequential kind of degradation of how well it's been scanned, has it been done in black and white or color, the stamping, the archiving, writing on them, in a sense, these images literally kind of bear witness to a process of, for want of a better word, abuse at Guantanamo. Here's a blank sheet of paper with a unique archive number. Everything that was sent to him went through this bureaucratic process. So these are gestures of support sent to someone, which are kind of transformed into something else by the bureaucratic intervention that produces them, which are then used in the control process exercised over that individual. And because he received so much of it, and because of it, some of it was quite strange, this is quite a good example. Dear Omar, thinking of you, I feel sorry for you, love from Sexy Leslie and Brian for my romantic holiday. He said on the one hand it kind of gave him a sense of protection because he realised so many people knew he was there, but because a lot of this stuff, there was so much of it, but also some of it was quite strange, he felt his interrogators were planting some of this material on him. So it ended up furthering his sense of paranoia and disorientation. In installational forms, there's a film I've made using some of this material, and sometimes also show it more conventionally photographically. And I'll end there.
Thank you, Edmund. And our next speaker is Ahlam Shibli.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm going to talk about my work called Heimat. Heimat, it's a German word meaning home. All my work dealing with the issue of home, from each time revealing a new issue, new question, and putting the thoughts together and then go and translate the words to images. Actually, I have to... Okay, so Heimat, I did it 2016, 2017. It's my last work, and made it in the area of Kassel. It's in Kassel city and the region. Actually, I was asked by Documenta to create a work in Kassel, and the theme I chose, it's looking at people who created a new home in Kassel and surrounding area. So Nordhessen, it's the region of Kassel, and I looked at two groups of immigrants, people that came because of the Second World War. First group, it's people of German origin who were living mainly in east of Europe from the 15th century on till the end of the Second World War, because of the Second World War they were expelled from their houses as a revenge for what the German did to the east side of Europe. So talking about mainly at that time, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Romania. And so we are talking about 15 million refugees or expellees that had to flee out of their homes between the year 1945 and 1946. The minimum is 15 million. There's a talk that actually the number is higher than that. Many came to the region of Kassel because it was an industrial area plus fields, so people could have food. The second group is it's the guest worker. Guest worker, it was a plan made with from Marshall Plan, bringing money to America to from America to Germany through England, to repower Germany in order also block the east side, the Soviet Union, and to block the black money that started to happen in Germany because of the Second World War. The guest worker, they were the plan who's coming. It was oriented by the American, so it was mainly people from, sorry for this boom boom, people coming from that time called Yugoslavia, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece. And the plan bringing worker or inviting worker, this is why they are called guest worker, and in German Gastarbeiter. The plan was to, so it started from 1950, and it's a direct result of the Second World War. Turkey asked to join this plan because actually Turkey at that time was mainly importing, and Turkey wanted to export, and the things that they could export it's workers, a human being to work. And with the German refuse, of course, they were refused because they didn't want to have a Muslim community inside Germany. Turkey put a pressure on the American, and they succeed to enter also the guest worker plan. There was the thinking that these people will come for 1 year and then renew their contract second year, and then they will go back to their home, and they will bring this experience of industrial experience, and they will import it back to their countries and build factories. But this is obvious and naive. You need first you need a plan to build factories. It's not enough that somebody know how to build a Volkswagen car. You need somebody to build a factory for this worker. Then there was the crisis of the oil in the end of the 70s. Many people, they were afraid to go back home, so they kept renewing contracts of working and settled in Germany, in Kassel and in the area. And so this is the issue that I deal with. I will show you the work and two things. Always with my work, I put a wall text. I call it art statement, which give the people an access how to read the work. So what I'm showing here and the previous. This is the wall text that will be in the exhibition, and hoping that people read it and get the access how to continue with the work. This is the first image. So this is a war prison that at the time of the Nazi regime, it was a prison divided to two sectors. One sector was for the Russian prisoners or Soviet Russian prisoners, and the other sector for the less strong enemy. So it was mainly Polish, French, and with the end of the Second World War, the American took control of the camp because it has already water, toilet, showers, and kitchen, plus room and bed. And the American put there the displaced people. Displaced people, it's mainly Jewish people who were freed from the concentration camps. And for 2 years till they find a plan where to go, and mainly people went to Palestine and America or other places in Europe. The Heimat für Triebener, the German refugees, they were the last to sit in this camp. The American, in the sector where it was where the Nazis put the Russian, the American put the Nazis, and where the Nazis put in, most of the Russian prisoners, they died in the camp. And there's a graveyard in a forest nearby, and they are buried there. The Americans put the Nazis there, Nazis with a high level, and they are all buried in the same graveyard in this cemetery. So last settled there the ex-police, the German ex-police, they are called Heimat für Triebener. And in the beginning of 1951, 52, they changed the name, and now it's called Trotzenheim. And people are still living in the same houses that they were built from the beginning for the prisoners. With each image I exhibit, it has a caption. So I give you an example of what does it mean to have a caption with the image. The role of that for me, for the caption, it's not only first there's the date that I made the photo. There's the place and the date I made the photo, and for me it's becoming more and more to make it more clear that there is something that I did see, I saw it, I have been, and I need you to trust me that that's the story I am telling you, it's the truth that I saw. And at the end, I will go back to this issue. The information that you will have in this caption, it's what you cannot receive from the image by the natural of the image, that you cannot know that the previous image was a prison if I wouldn't deliver you this information. The second image is this one of the factories that the people, the ex-police built in this camp, and this is a fabric factory. Later with the other image you would see a result that already used. And the interesting things in this camp, that it was the opposite of the usual. The usual is that these refugees will go to find work where the German villages are. But in this situation, people from the villages came here because many people from Czechoslovakia, they already had the factories there, and they knew how to do textile, expensive textile, etc. So they could offer work for the villagers around. Again, the caption. This is one example of the houses in this camp. People are not supposed to change the houses or to make any change. Of course, people are doing it. There's places that totally strict, no, not allowed change. But the down part, it's the original part, and then the family renovated and not renovated, added the additional floor. All the roads in this camp renamed, and they have names of towns exist in Czechia and Slovakia and Poland. And it's the name of towns where these German ex-police came from. There are two graveyards in this camp. This is the closet graveyard. What they did, actually, they took, in Germany, you have to pay for the grave to continue it. And after 15 years, if you don't pay, then the authority remove the bones and remove the stone. In this camp, they decided to collect all stones and to make out of them a monument, and they label it as all the way to the right. The black stones is telling that this has become a monument. These stones of the graves. Another factory was made in this camp for making flowers, and I'm showing in the museum of the camp a film that was made about this flower factory. I asked with this, so you didn't see people. Now you will see that. Now we will start with the people. I asked the madam you are seeing in the photo to come back and to show me how did she work in this factory, because this is the flowers factory, and I wanted her to react what she did, and so I could make the image. The Heimatvertriebene, they are mostly, coming from Czechoslovakia, they are mostly Catholic, and we are talking about Protestant Germany. So they had to struggle also to have the option to have their church. And they did bring the Madonna from one place in Czechia where they come from. And the dressing of the Madonna, it was made by the second photo I showed with the fabric factory. It's a mixture of people, ex-police plus local people, and with the I tried with the ex-police to photograph what the home that they are having now, and to look what is their new home. So I would call and ask, please, I want to go with you to a place where you now feel this is home. And always people talk only about the past, about what's happened to them, to say the personal story again and again. And always they want to take me to see the monuments that recognize or their issue of having lost their home. So here it's the people in ceremony of installing a monument. This is the monument that they were installing. Now, next to this monument, just on the left side, there is another monument. And I asked her, but why another monument? You already have. And they say, no, but it's not enough. That monument, it's talk only about for the loss of the home. But we want another monument that talk about the people who died in the way, because 2 million people lost their life in the way. It's a lot of people made it walking or by train with 60 persons in each wagon. And trust me, every 5 kilometers you will find another monument. And another monument. Another monument. So this monument saying for the dead people and for the lost home. Another monument. The man we see in the photo, his mother, originally from Poland, and she lost her, she had a child, and the child didn't survive the way, died. And he asked his mother if she wanted to go back to see her home. So at the end she went, and he asked, do you want this home back? And she said, no, if I want this home back, it's mean a new war. This was our past, and we should let it go. Here in Germany, we are having a new home. This is one of the, he was 12 years old, so he was also from the youth of Hitler. And this is what we will see in the next image, document and certificates that he was part of the Hitler Junde, the boys of Hitler. So here a photo of a man from Turkey who came to Germany to work, and he's showing me photos during their work and the certificate of his health insurance for the work. Back to ex-police guy. What he's folding, it's the flag of the Sudeten. And Sudeten, this is what Hitler called the land of where this is the first part that the countries give Hitler first this part, hoping that he will be quiet, and he called it Sudetenland, and the next day he went Hitler and, of course, occupied Prague. And this is also explain why in Czechoslovakia it was the first place that they kick the German out of their homes and occupied their territory. So he's folding the flag. A letter from a sister to her other sister and her mother, inviting them for her wedding. She's Spanish. The worker, usually they will come alone and leave their children. A phenomenon, actually, we see it also today with the worker from the Asia that living there, and from Latin America, leaving their kids with the grandparents, and the parents will come and work. So the lady, her 3 children, they were growing with different people, and one of the 3 came in the age of 17. She came back to Germany and she wanted to live with her mother. And the sister sending a letter telling, I'm getting married, please, if you cannot afford the train to come to my wedding, it's all fine. And the reason for me to put such a letter, because also in Germany all the time talking about this obsession about how people are integrating, and nobody talking about what the price that these people had to pay in order to come as a guest worker to build Germany. And even it was interesting when I ask people, how do you feel that Kassel did for you in order to feel that Kassel is your home? People will take this question that I'm asking them, what did you do that Kassel accept you? And no one could believe that there is another side of this question. Of integration. It's what the city did integrate with the people. I think this was, for me, more important question. So the gentleman showing exactly this Sudetenland, the German area in Czechia.
You just got 1 minute, Ahlam.
Okay. So I would run to the end to show you the installation, because that's also important. So this is the complete work. It's 53 images. This is the installation from Kassel. And always with my work, I'm not in favor of this one single image. And for me, the group is coming to tell one issue and to reveal and to build something. So always in my work, it's a group of images to be considered as one specific group and cannot be divided. So just to give you an example how I install it. And in this series, I didn't divide it to 2 objects, to 2 not object themes. It's one work dealing with 2 communities immigrated to Kassel because of the Second World War. So the photographs, they were mixed with each other according to their issue. Now I want to tell you what was the reason that I thought that I asked the people. I should stop. I asked the people to show me what is the new home, but there was the things with the monument and what actually, and then I changed the way how I think, because I was stubborn to see one way. And when I was talking with one person, and he said, what is hurting me, that the German who live here, they have their own history, they have a furniture from their grandparents, etc. And then this is what I saw, exactly this is what the monument is doing. The monument telling the people, okay, I also belong to this village or this town, and here there's a monument bringing my history, so I am not anymore unrooted. I have a root. It's correct that it's put it only after 1945, but this is my past, and it's included in the narrative of that place. Thank you.
Our final speaker is Nikolaj, and Nikolaj is going to start, I understand, with a short film.
I wish I was on that ship, but I'm here. The important thing is going to England, and don't worry about after that.
We were caught by the French control. We were trying to cross the border.
Best country UK.
Best country in the world. It is the number one country for human being.
The most
Human
good
rights.
country in Europe is UK.
It is too easy to get documents. And we can make a good living. Too much water, otherwise we can swim also.
England is too good for we people. I love England. I love England. Today I miss a chance. Goodbye.
Promised Land was filmed in Calais between 2009 and 2011. We filmed the main bulk of the film after the first jungle encampment had been demolished in the autumn of 2009. Migrants were dispersed and in hiding in shrublands, industrial sites, squats, war bunkers, beach huts, etc. The police had become increasingly hostile towards migrants, so they were paranoid and scared of people's intentions. The majority of migrants in Calais are there to try to get to England. The main characters of my film is a group of Iranian migrants who fled Iran after they had been part of a failed uprising in 2009-10. The film shows the daily lives of migrants in Calais. We hear how they reflect on what they left behind, on what they hope to find in England, and how they plan and try to get there. But we also get very close to the migrants and see how they live day-to-day lives, how they cook, how they cut each other's hair, how they live. So the film becomes a proof that they are a lot more normal and civilized than populist views lead us to believe. Some parts we couldn't film, like when some migrants are in the act of hiding in trucks or getting onto ferries. So I asked some of the migrants to film for me, which they agreed to. They later sent me the SD cards by post, and one gave it to me in person in England after he managed to cross the channel. There was some fantastic footage, like what we just see when Ali is swimming through the harbour on a freezing cold November night to get onto a ferry. Promised Land was originally made as a 3-screen installation. I used the very widescreen format to create the feeling of being in the camps with the migrants when we filmed there, and also to show how small the human is in relation to the enormous ferries, trucks, motorway systems, ferry terminals that we encounter in the film. These are the environments that the migrants have to conquer in order to make it to their promised land. A year after completing the film, I returned to Calais to see if anyone that we knew from the production of the film was still there. I wanted to document photographically how life had developed in the camps that we had filmed a year earlier. Seeing the camps was quite an apocalyptic sight. They were all deserted and full of inert debris. It was as though time had stopped. It was as though life had stopped there. All camps had bundles of blankets and sleeping bags, and I decided to create a sculptural intervention in each scene. I made bundles that resemble I made bundles that represent a person covered by a blanket, like I'd seen so often when filming in these camps a year before. These ambiguously shaped objects can be seen to resemble a sleeping person or a covered dead body, or even a large cocoon in the process of metamorphosis. With flashlights and by arranging objects surrounding the central bundle, I composed the scenes to lead the eye towards the center. The photographs suddenly became strangely intriguing and poetic. They began to do something beyond just documenting deserted camps. I didn't know what had happened to many of the migrants there. Were they locked up in detention centers? Had they died? Or had they made it to their destination? Each photo is titled in homage to a person that I knew used to live in each of the camps.
Yazık oluyor insanlara. Buraya geliyorlar ama suyu bilmedikleri için de boğuluyorlar. Bilhassa kışın mesela geliyorlar. Kışın da su belli bir noktada derecede yükseliyor. Botlarla geçmek istiyorlar. Tabii botu kullanmayı bilmiyorlar. Botu kullanamadıkları zaman da akıntı onları deviriyor. Boğuluyorlar, gidiyorlar yani sağa sola takılıyorlar mesela. Çok zor durumda kalıyor. Yazık, günah yani. Bir tane iki tane sürüyle geliyorlar. Bunlar nasıl geliyorlar? İnsan tacirleri vardır tabii mutlaka. Onlara baş etmek çok zordur. Onlar tehlikeli insanlar. Yani bir nesili tüketmeye çalışıyorlar yani. Artık o nesil yani siyahi kısım yani yazık. Günah değil mi? Onlar da insan değil mi yani? 3 kuruş 5 kuruş için ölümle pençeleşiyorlar nehirlerde. Nehir yataklarında mesela. Ufak çocuklar kışın soğuk, buz mesela. Çok soğuk. -18, -20'de ellerinde ufacık çocuklar mesela. Ufacık yeni doğmuş çocuklar onlarla beraber karşıya geçmek istiyorlar. Çok günah bir şey. Geçemiyorlar da. Soğuklarda doğanın içinde mücadele etmeye çalışıyorlar. Bu sefer ne oluyor? Bunlar birçoğu da ölümle sonuçlanıyor yani. Yardım etmek gerekiyor insanlar aslında.
In this short film, we're floating down the river Meriç that constitutes the border between Turkey and Greece. The Turkish fisherman Harim describes in haunting detail how migrants often drown while trying to cross this river to get to Greece. He describes how he and fellow Turkish citizens are in a moral dilemma because it's illegal to help migrants in any way, even if they're drowning. He has empathy for these people, and it hurts him that he can't help him. The low camera angle and the slow-moving pace in the film is intended to give the sense that it's seen from the point of view of a person floating in the surface of the water. In a sense, the viewer becomes a drowned person. The film highlights how governments deny law-abiding citizens to show empathy to people in need and insist on an us and them rhetoric. This does not just happen in Turkey, where the film is made, but all over Europe and beyond. In 2014 in southern Italy, I made a series of sculptures resembling body bags. My intention was to make a sculptural monument for the thousands of people who tragically lose their lives in the Mediterranean as they try to get to Europe. The plan was to leave the sculptures in the sea for up to a year to develop a patina of marine organisms. They would then be hoisted up, dried and exhibited. About a month into this process, a brutal storm developed in the bay where my sculptures were hanging under a raft. It totally ripped apart the raft and the sculptures were scattered all over the seabed. I was in Paris at the time and asked my Italian assistant, who was also a diver and underwater cameraman, to film some footage and email it to me so I could get a sense of the damage. I really had lost everything, but the video footage she sent me was quite interesting. I asked him to film more, and over the next 6 months he went on several dives where he located sculptures and filmed his search. I began to edit the video, color graded, and worked with a sound designer and developed a new and perhaps even better work than the one I originally intended. Nature's destructive intervention had added a very fitting narrative to my work. The final work is an installation with video, sound and sculpture, which is currently in an exhibition in Brussels called Islam, It's Also Our History. The spectator is immersed in this underwater environment and is taken on a search for these lost body bag sculptures. When I exhibited the installation at Fotografisk Center in Copenhagen last year, I also showed a series of photographs which you can see on the left side of this image. The photographs document the marks and cuts inflicted on the sculptures by the violent storm. The objects synonymous with drowned and lost migrants are stripped of personality and heritage. Even though there's no face to portray, I insist on calling these images portraits as I focus on the individual cuts and dents and bruises they have had after being dragged over a rocky seabed for a sustained period of time. Their shapes, but in particular these wounds, is what makes them distinguishable from each other and thereby what gives them their individuality. Their individual characteristics are shaped by the violence they've been subjected to. The motif of the body bag, or the covered body, has intrigued me since I first visited Calais in 2009. Recently I've been working on a photographic series called the Floating Series. The work takes its departure in photographs taken in the Parisian neighborhood of Stalingrad, which last year saw nearly 2,000 migrants living in the streets. Every day I passed this area on my way to my studio, and I felt a strong urge to react to this desperate scene. For months I went there on a daily basis to talk with the migrants and to take the photos that has become the Floating Series. I often saw photojournalists who photographed the migrants in degrading situations, rarely with the consent of the migrants, whose faces would appear in newspapers and on the news, on TV. This made them feel intimidated and exploited, and they often complained to me about that. I was thinking about how I could document their tragic situation while still showing respect, and I decided to focus my visual research on the people who were completely covered with blankets. I imagined that the moments where they were able to sleep were the only parts of their daily routine where they could ease their exhausted minds and bodies and metaphorically float away from their squalid and hopeless situation. Their fleeting moments of privacy, their tender depictions of these people's condition. Each covered person is removed from their context in the streets of Paris and placed to float in a black void. I want to create images that are confrontational and yet poetic and dreamy, and thus invite the spectator to spend time reflecting and feeling. This approach is totally opposite to the media's shock tactics. It's important for me that the images are alluring and remains complex and mysterious. For me, the cocoon-like shapes show the potential these people can be to society if we in Europe can find a constructive way of turning this so-called refugee crisis into something positive. Here's an installation shot. This is the last work I'm going to talk about. It's an installation shot from my most recent film, Quicksand. Quicksand is fiction. It includes the voices of 12 actors and video footage filmed underwater from a drone and from a boat in a very wavy sea. I had the idea to make this project because I wanted to react to the us and them rhetoric that we so often hear in discussions about migrants coming to Europe. In Quicksand, we become them. It tells the story of Jason, a man fighting for his life in the Mediterranean Sea. Quicksand amplifies tendencies within present-day Europe and sets it in the near future in a hostile environment. The economy has imploded, hospitals and state schools are closing, trains rarely run, etc. Politically, the far right has become increasingly influential, taking advantage of people's frustrations to stoke resentment against immigrants. EU has collapsed, and throughout Europe, borders have closed. It's against this backdrop that the English guy, Jason, a husband and father, has decided to join the exodus of people who pay people smugglers to help them leave Europe in the hope of starting a new life in an undefined somewhere else. Jason's journey ends when the boat he's in capsizes, and he and many other European migrants are struggling to survive. And Quicksand is currently in the exhibition Tension and Conflict at Museum of Art, Architecture and Technology, the MART in Lisbon.
Hello, love. Only me. So I'm just ringing to say hello. I miss you, kids. So we're somewhere in south of France, I think. Could be anywhere though. Difficult to tell.
Thank you, Nikolaj. Folks, we have about 20 minutes for questions, and I was hoping to just start with a general one before opening it to the floor. Going back to what Alona said earlier on, just thinking about photography and politics, the politics of photography, it seems a lot of this is about the politics of representation, specifically around migrancy, displacement, and torture sites or interrogation sites. And it seems part of the problem is that we have too many images of precisely that. Migrancy, displacement, and they're often mediatized, they're often spectacularized, and they're often not so much about empathy as they are about displacing empathy. And I wanted to talk to each of you and just ask a simple question. How does your practice refuse that economy of images associated with migrancy, displacement, and torture sites? And do you feel to a certain extent that your images become evidentiary, not evidence, because that's a wholly different thing, but in a way evidentiary, in and around a documentary aesthetic. And I was wondering if that chimes with your work, Edmund.
Yes. I suppose my immediate response to that is the subjects I've worked on tend not to be. We have images on our screens, but they are images from a very particular viewpoint. And what I'm trying to show is what's going on behind that. I think complexity, I think, is an important thing here. And I think all three series of images we've seen here, bodies of work, are all complex. It's so, I mean, what we see on our screens tends to be, by necessity, short and simple and brutal. And I suppose what I'm trying to do is get beyond the short and the simple and the brutal. I mean, the subjects I work on are brutal, but these are complex subjects, and they are subjects that affect all of us, and we are all involved with them in some way, even if it's just the starting point of what has caused these subjects to happen and evolve. We are affected by those. So I suppose what I'm trying to do is to make work which I hope in some way can reach the individuals who look at it, to engage and to see and think, to encourage, to see and think in a way which is perhaps different to how they see this on the screens that they watch.
Ahlam, do you think similarly, I mean, this refusal to represent stereotyped images of displacement, and specifically in and around Palestine and your work on Palestine, does that again, with part of your practice, is it as important what you don't show as what you do show?
I can answer through this work of Heimat, but I will answer through the previous work that I made for Documenta for Athens, where I photograph in Al Khalil, Hebron city, and there I photographed how people, Palestinian people and Israeli settlers people, are adapting the occupation into their own daily life. And first of all, the work was for me to read, to scan and read the situation, and how can I survive such a situation of occupation. It's a trauma. It's a daily trauma, and I think I do photograph what, as a Palestinian, I don't want to see. And I think I do photograph it. And
Nikolaj, does that chime with your work? I'm thinking about the more recent series of works in and around Paris.
Well, I think it's important we are so bombarded with images constantly, and as we've just talked about, quite brutal images that shocks us. And these images, they're almost becoming numbing. They almost make us unable to feel the horror of the situation or the sadness of the situation. So what I hope to create are these visual spaces, or I hope to offer to the viewer a moment where you can be introspective, and because we've already seen all these images, so there's no reason for creating yet more images like that. So I hope that I create images that gives people a space to feel, to be introspective for a while, and to think about the situation, rather than following what is constantly being told in terms of numbers of migrants, in terms of these horrible images that we see. And when dealing directly with migrants, which I did, for instance, in Promised Land that I started out showing, at that time when we came to Calais, people they were really paranoid, and they were really fed up with journalists coming with a cameraman to, without asking permission, to just film the sort of degrading situation when people sit on the floor eating and stuff like that. It's not nice for these people. So the way we went about finding characters to the film was completely different. It was a long and time-consuming process that took almost a month. But we had that time. So we got people to trust us. We won people's trust, and we trusted the people we filmed. We all almost had a friendship going. I'm still in contact with some of these people today, nearly, 8 years after I filmed it. So there's this respect, but also an economy in, like, TV companies. They don't have the economy to invest a month in sending journalists out to, they just need images because we're so hungry for images, and that's sad.
Thank you, Nikolaj. I've got lots of questions, folks, but in the spirit of egalitarianism, I'd like to reach out to the audience. I would assume we have a microphone. If anybody has any comments, questions for our speakers, limericks, anecdotes, jokes. Anybody out there? There's a gentleman at the back in the middle.
I have one question for all of you, I guess, which is, we've seen all of your work presented in various galleries, museums. Do you ever have the feeling you're preaching to the converted? These locations, they're for people who are visually trained. They speak the same language as you, which is a foreign language to a lot of other people. So I'd just be interested if you ever feel, God, this has to reach out to some other, to a wider audience.
Good question. Would anybody like to take that up?
Yeah, I think that that's a fair point. The gallery or the museum space, I think for me, is just one of the audiences, one of the contexts in which I can reach an audience. But it's one of several audiences. There are also audiences that I try and reach through publications, through the internet, through making work which can be seen and experienced on a number of different platforms. So yeah, the books I make are one form, the museum exhibitions is another, but then I've also, the work I've made about the CIA secret prison program has become, for a period of time, the #1 click on the Financial Times website. It was picked up by the Mail on the Daily Mail website. Now that's the most widely read English language website in the world. So that's a whole different audience, and that gets a whole different type of reaction in that context. But yeah, these are different contexts to reach different audiences, but many audiences exist out there.
But may I add to that that it's also important. It's also important for the institutions themselves to have, for museums to have proper outreach, so that it's not just people who are interested in going to a museum who go and see the work, but there's educational purposes. So that school children, it would be like, it would be part of education. It would be part of what school children do on a day out of the school, and thereby it would reach a much wider audience. The exhibition I'm in Brussels at the moment does exactly that, and they, along with the exhibition itself, that they've made educational material. They have sent it out to schools, so it does become part of curriculum. It does become part of enriching a wider audience than just an art audience.
Ahlam?
Yeah, I want to.
Speak into the microphone.
I wanted to add the audience that they are photographed. Personally, for me, it's very important the people I photograph, that they come and see the exhibition. And I have been doing it since the beginning, also with the idea that I don't use the word to shoot. This is terrible. The idea of photographing people and present the image of people, I think it's these people have the first right to see their images. So plus that I'm going back to the people and show them their photos and the context that I'm putting these photos into, the complete and final work. I also make the efforts to bring the people through the exhibition and see it. And with this work of, that I made in for Castle, we even made, of course, this is why the Documenta have -7 million euro, because we use the money very well. So we, I ask that all people I photograph, or all people who help me with this work, have access, free access to see their work, and unlimited access to see their photograph. And I receive these 100 tickets. Plus, we organize, with the team that helped me to do it, that each group of people will have a translation, guided tour with a translation in their own original language. So we had a guided tour where I did it in English, and then I had somebody usually from or the team or the people themselves volunteer to translate. So we had a Spanish tour one day, other day Croatian, Turkish. We had a bigger group, so we made twice. We had a Greek and we had a German tour, and especially for people we photograph. But I have done it with all my work. There was a work I photographed in Poland about orphan children in children homes. And with the museum, we organized, first for the opening, we invited only directors and the team, no children, because I didn't want that people during the opening start pointing to the children and their photos. So we invited the team for the opening party ceremony, and then in the next 3 days, we invited, organized, guided through the exhibition with activity from student volunteering for all children that I photograph, and I photograph in children homes all over Poland. Same I photographed in a Jordanian refugee camp, and in the art center where it was exhibited, the institution sent a bus to bring all the people from that were involved with my work to come and see this the exhibition. So I hope we are answering.
I don't think we should underestimate the how the importance, well, of our institutions, like museums, being prepared to put this kind of work inside their walls. I mean, it's not easy to get work of this nature into many institutions, museums, and galleries. So, I think for the work that we're making to be seen in those contexts is important for those institutions to be validating that these are important subjects, and the way in which we are trying to explore them are worth seeing. That's not an easy thing to achieve. So to have work in those contexts, I think, is important.
Just to add to your point, because you've brought up an interesting conundrum. It's something that Ed and I have been discussing, and Nikolaj and Ahlam. If the cultural sphere is a consensual sphere, i.e., we all agree displacement is bad, we all agree torture is bad, we all agree special rendition is bad, then we're all in agreement, and anyhow, so in actuality there is no debate, which begs a simple question. What happens when you culturalize political debate? Whose interests are served in that moment of the culturalization of political debate? Does that suggest that the sphere of politics is incapable of dealing with this, or simply doesn't want to deal with this? Or does it actually suggest something even more sinister, that it's in the interest of politicians to culturalize this debate, to place it into a consensual sphere, because then they don't have to deal with it. Then it is culturalized. Then it is displaced from the sphere of potential political transformation, where something does get done.
Yeah, but the question is where does art stop and where does political activism start? I always get a strange feeling when I see these very, all these problems that we're facing right now presented aesthetically in any form or shape, because I don't feel it's the right way to present it, frankly. And it leaves me with sometimes with the sour taste if we sort of use common aesthetics to deal with these subjects.
I think that discomfort is precisely why we should be doing it.
Do we have other questions from the audience? Sir.
Thank you. Ahlam, you mentioned the trust of the audience. And I have this feeling that the members of the panel relate to this trust in a different way. And I'm wondering, well, is that true? And what's the essence of this trust? And how do you relate to it? So that's really a question for all.
Just to clarify that, you're talking about the trust of the audience, but also the trust that each artist develops with their subject.
No, now I'm talking about the relation between the artist, the art, and the audience watching. Yeah.
Thank you. Ahlam?
Did I talk about trust of the audience?
Trust of the audience.
I didn't talk about it, I think.
Well, you mentioned it was in relation to the captions. When you talked about you know what you said, but the need for the audience to trust in your feeling or your experience of the reality or what had happened.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't get it from me. Because it's a very, the issue of doing a photograph, it's, I didn't manipulate the situation in order to create my narrative. I create my narrative from what is there and what I have seen, and the trust of the audience in relation to that, because for each person there's a narrative and truth. We can go both to the same place, but my truth will be absolutely different than your truth. And what I, as an artist, of course, I want the trust of the audience to believe, or to believe, not to believe, this is not a good word, to trust that this is the truth that I saw. So you are giving me your time in order to read my narrative and my truth. Of course, it can also not happen, and many times will a person come to me, and it happened in one museum that a person came to me and he said, all what you are writing here, it's fake. I know the truth. I know this place much better than you, and you are faking. I cannot change his mind, because this person, of course, it was a political issue. I photographed in a village where people destroy the home in order to build the house. And this person was stuck to see another narrative, because he thought they destroy the home in order to be freed and to have a new identity. But he didn't care to ask, does it really correct that these people wanted a new identity, or they were manipulated and forced to create a new identity, which this is exactly what my work dealing with. It's not about this audience to see to believe in this story or not, but the main focus for me and the point for me is I want that I see what is there. And when I say I would allow myself, I want us to see what is there. When I go to photograph in Khalil, Hebron, I want to see that we, the Palestinians, how we are adapting the occupation tools into everyday life. And I want that I ask and we ask why I am using exactly the same material that the Israeli putting in the checkpoints,
barbed wire?
Yeah, it's the same exactly what the army using. They come and use it in their houses in order to separate their territory from the territory of the neighbor. I saw a wall of bars filled with concrete, and I was sure that this is the army did it. It's not. And only out of politeness, because the person showed up, I said, who made it? And he said, my father and my uncle. I was shocked. And this is what I want that we see together. We see, not together, that we see, because I'm seeing it.
Edmund, in less than 30 seconds, building trust with your audience. Okay, 35 seconds.
Yeah, I really don't understand the question, to be honest. Why, I mean, what do you want me to do with my audience? What trust? What should I be doing to my audience to make them trust me? Why do they have to trust me?
I think that's rhetorical. Nikolaj, I mean, this issue of the audience is, of course, and it's very important. I mean, but you can't control what your audience takes away. In fact, being an unreliable witness is often as important, and in fact, creating a narrative that is not the ordinary narrative, that is not the mediatized narrative. Do you think this helps the audience access this material?
Well, I think when I make a work, there are certain things that I decide in my visual language, so I don't want to use shock tactics. I use something else. So in a certain, like, you take decisions when you make work that influences the audience, but only to a certain extent can you control that. So I can't control my audience, but I can set up some parameters where I hope that the audience will perceive my work in a certain way.
Thank you, Nikolaj. Folks, the panelists will be here for a while longer. If any of you have any questions, they're very approachable. Please do go approach them, ask questions. I would like to thank Nikolaj, Edmund, and Ahlam.